guys, how's it going? Today I want to talk about 10 different shrubs that are considered dwarf, miniature, small, tiny, just those types of shrubs that are really easy to tuck into your landscape, especially in small areas where we want the shrub structure, but we don't have room for something to get enormous. Of the 10 shrubs we're going to talk about today, I have personally grown 8 of them in my garden. The other 2 are brand new varieties, so I haven't had a chance to grow them yet, but I'm very excited to. But they all fit within that really small category. Some of them like sun, some can handle more shade, so let's just jump in with number 1, which is the Tater Tot Arborvitae. You might hear them called Arborvitae, which I think is the proper pronunciation. In our region, we've always said Arborvitae. The botanical name is Thuja occidentalis, also known as the American or Eastern Arborvitae, Eastern White Cedar. There's probably other common names that you have seen them referred to as, but typically when you think of an Arborvitae, you think of a tall, kind of narrow hedging sort of evergreen. They are very soft, they smell good, but the Tater Tot stays 12 to 24 inches tall and wide. This cute little soft globe-shaped evergreen, super easy to tuck into a landscape, to use in a container, to use as a kind of an informal hedge. There are so many uses for this shrub, and I've grown them in a lot of different applications. So in my landscape, I've got a couple of Tater Tots in the ground. They've done really, really well for us. They do get to the 24-inch side of things. They tend to like where they're at. They are definitely 2 by 2, but they tuck in easily. I actually transplanted one this spring. I dug it up and moved it to an area near our vegetable garden. It didn't skip a beat, didn't even act like it had been transplanted. It just looked like it has been growing there this whole time. I've also had Tater Tots in containers, a couple of different urns actually underneath our pergola, which have moved there by our greenhouse now, and they just have done so well for us. They are a zone 3 through 7, incredibly winter hardy. So for those of you who want an evergreen choice that's tougher maybe than a boxwood, because boxwoods are typically like a zone 5-ish, and the rule of thumb when you're planting shrubs or perennials in a container and you want them to winter over, you want to choose something that's rated at 2 zones colder than your current growing zone. So like we're technically a 6 now. So I would want to give myself a buffer and choose things that are at least a zone 4 or lower in order to survive the winter. Sometimes we get things to survive. I get boxwoods to survive in containers too, but it is a little bit more of a risk. The Tater Tot wants full sun if possible. They can do a part sun location, but they need a minimum of 6 hours in order to be very happy. The cool thing about the Tater Tot is that with that sort of evergreen, I feel like you want to choose a variety that you don't have to prune on, and pruning really isn't necessary for this one, especially because it stays so small that you get that nice ferny look on the outsides instead of like a really sheared look, which I do like that in some areas of my landscape. I like formal too, but I like the texture. It's a very kind of fern-esque. They do like well-draining soil, but they do like it to be on the moist side. So they want a consistent source of irrigation. We have all of ours being watered by a drip system. Also mulching up around the root system of your plant, 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch is a really good idea. When you stack it up against other varieties of evergreen, you know, your spruces and pines and all those kinds of things, it is a little bit more shade tolerant than those other types. So if you have an area that's kind of borderline and you have a hard time getting things to survive because it doesn't get full sun all day long, this one would be a really good option. Number 2 is the Firelight Tidbit Hydrangea, which is actually a fairly new variety, but we do have some in our garden. We planted them this year. We planted them when it was hot. They are completely exposed out on our new property where we're developing some flower beds. They get the wind, they get sun from sunup to sundown. There's nothing protecting these plants. And they look like they are just loving the conditions out there. And for us in Eastern Oregon, where it's so dry and hot, we hardly have any humidity, any rainfall, any of that. That's pretty amazing. So they're a type of Hydrangea paniculata, panicle hydrangea. So they have kind of the panicle, kind of football-shaped blooms, if you will. You might think of like the Limelight hydrangea is probably the most popular. There's a Limelight Prime now, which is a kind of improved, smaller package version of that. And then there's, you know, the traditional Firelight, which gets a lot bigger. So you think of hydrangeas as being these huge, huge shrubs, especially panicle type, but the tidbit stays 2 to 3 feet tall and wide. We planted them flanking the opening to our grass pathway leading to our cut flower garden, and then in between I planted denim and lace Russian sage because I think it's going to be a beautiful low maintenance area, kind of a nice entryway way for color. You know, the tidbits bloom early to midsummer, so they start blooming a lot earlier than a lot of other hydrangeas. They come out white, and then they start changing color early in the season too, to kind of pink red tones, which ours have. And then, so they go all the way through frost. I mean, the blooms look gorgeous, and we'll probably leave the blooms on them through winter as just a nice winter structure. But the leaves also turn color, which is kind of an unusual trait in a panicle hydrangea. I mean, I see like my limelights, which I'm looking at, they're right outside this window here. They usually turn a little bit yellow, the leaves do, and then the leaves fall, but the leaves on the tidbit turn all kinds of different colors. You'll see green with the red and the yellow, a little bit of orange. They're just beautiful. And one of the cool things about all panicle hydrangeas is that they are the most sun tolerant. They're also incredibly forgiving. They bloom on new wood, which means that there's not as much stress if you live in a hard winter climate. These are a zone 3 through 8. So if you live in an area where you really want hard hydrangeas and you have super hard winters, this is a really good option for you to try, because they will push new growth that like the current season that we're in, and that's the growth that they will bloom on. So, you know, winter is not going to kill any buds. If you have deer grazing through and they graze off the buds, you'll still most likely get blooms. You want to prune them in late winter, early spring, when you start to see the leaf buds start to swell. That way you can, you know, distinguish if there's any dead branches in there. You can cut those out, and then the rule of thumb is to take your panicles down by about 1/3 of their height. Really no more than that, because if you go more than that, which I've done before, you'll create kind of some weak stems. But with these smaller varieties that don't get super big, they just stay more compact, more tough, sturdier branches. They also tolerate a wide range of soil types. So the panicle and arborescens actually type hydrangeas, their bloom color is not an indicator of what the soil pH is. That's usually just for macrophylla and serrata type hydrangeas. This type of hydrangea will be true to its color no matter what the soil pH is, but as a whole, this group of hydrangeas is just more tolerant of a wide range of pH, and so they just kind of thrive wherever you put them. We usually fertilize once a year. You can fertilize monthly from early spring till about the end of July if you want nice, you know, rapid growth, but it's not going to make or break the performance of how it blooms. And typically we do ours early spring, maybe again late spring, and that's about it, and they still do great. Another shrub that tolerates a very wide range of soil pH is number 3 on my list, which is the sugar baby forsythia. I love forsythias. We need to incorporate some in our new property, actually in our current garden. This is one I had in our past garden, our old garden, and I enjoyed it so much. Our garden before was so much smaller than what we have now, and so knowing about and trying out some of these smaller shrubs was just, it was vital. I couldn't fit anything big, and when I used to think of forsythia, I would think, well, I need like 10 to 12 feet, you know, tall and wide, to incorporate, or to accommodate rather, this huge shrub. Sugar babies grow 18 inches, so that's 1.5 feet, right? Yeah, 1.5 feet to 3 feet tall and wide. So it stays under the 3-foot marker. When it blooms in the spring, there are blooms from like the base of the branch all the way down at the soil, all the way to the tips of this plant. Like, it's so packed with blooms. They're gorgeous. They are deer resistant. They're really good in like urban settings. The thing you need to know and make sure you don't do with forsythias is prune them at the wrong time. They bloom on old wood, so if you want to prune them, but with this one, I feel like you probably don't even have to worry about pruning them because they stay so small. But if you are going to prune them, you need to do it immediately after they're done blooming in the spring. That way, oh, hi Russell. That way they have the rest of the season to form their buds for next year's blooms. If you prune them too late in the season, you'll probably cut off next year's blooms and you'll forfeit that spring show the next year. So just be mindful that they bloom on old wood. Prune them immediately after blooming in the spring. Same goes with lilacs. They are a zone 5 through 8, and they do prefer a well-draining soil, so you don't want to place them somewhere where your soil holds on to too much moisture. Number 4 on my list is the pink microchip butterfly bush, also called buddleia. I have a couple of these in our garden and I enjoy them so much. Right now, we're in September right now, and they are in their full, absolute full glory. They usually start blooming about midsummer, but this one starts blooming a little bit earlier than all of your other butterfly bushes, and it stays super small. So 18 to 24 inches tall and wide. It's a wonderful shrub to even tuck in the edge of your border, and which is where I have mine. I have mine surrounded by a quickfire hydrangea on one side, and then the other side we've got blue blooming caryopteris, which is another great shrub that's not part of my list, but it's one to look into. Those two together, that blue caryopteris and the pink buddleia, because they bloom at the exact same time of the year, and for a good portion of the year, it's an amazing show in the garden. They are a zone 5 through 9, and they are deer resistant. They attract all of the pollinators. They're always covered in at least honeybees for me. But if you see hummingbirds coming around, they will visit your butterfly bushes, as well as butterflies, of course, but I think honeybees are the main pollinator I see around mine. They do bloom on new wood, so if you do need to prune them, you can do that in late winter, early spring. However, I mean, 18 to 24 inches, I don't prune mine at all. They never see a pruner unless I see a broken branch or something. Couple of things to note with your butterfly bushes. You do want to make sure to put them in an area that receives full sun. Like, the more sun you can give your butterfly bushes, the better. And the second thing, you need to make sure that the area does not hold on to too much water. They do not fare well in really wet areas. So it's one that we try to make sure, you know, we water everything with drip irrigation here. We have to. And so we really limit the amount of drip irrigation that runs nearby our butterfly bushes once they're established. First year, we water them fairly consistently, like we do with anything else that's newly planted. But after that, we really back off on the water and make sure that they're never sitting in too much. The other thing is that when you plant them, just make sure to bump the root ball up a little bit from your current soil level. So if your soil level's here, make sure your, root ball is sticking up slightly. That way it facilitates water drainage, I guess. It allows the water to drain away from the crown of your plant instead of settling in. If it's too low in the hole, the water will go in and it can rot the plant out really fast. So just make sure to bump that root ball up. It looks weird. It looks like, it shouldn't be like that, but they do prefer to be planted that way. And with other butterfly bushes, their counterparts that get huge, you do have to be very mindful about when you're pruning them, and you do want to prune them. Otherwise, you'll end up with these shrubs that have blooms all the way just at the tops of the plant rather than, in an area where you can see them. But with one that stays so short and so small, it's just not as much of a concern, which I love. I love plants that you just get to plant them and you really don't want to touch them. Those are the kind of plants we need more of in our garden. I do anyway. Number 5 is the tiny wine 9-bark. 9-barks are just overall a wonderful shrub, because oftentimes, there's so many shrubs with green leaves that are beautiful, but sometimes we want some contrast. We want to put something in that adds some dimension and some different interest. And the 9-barks are really wonderful to use for that, because they can take full sun. They can take a lot of different types of soil, and then they just add the beautiful color. And they bloom in the spring. And there are a lot of different varieties. The tiny wine stays 3 to 4 feet tall and wide. And while 4 feet to me seems like you're riding the line between a small shrub and one that's maybe medium sized, the other 9-barks, like Diablo, grows 10 feet tall by 10 feet wide. That's huge, huge shrub. Ginger wine, I think, grows like 5 to 6 feet tall and wide. So tiny wine gives you the option of a red-leaved shrub, but in a much smaller package. The leaves are smaller. It's a very fluffy kind of shrub, and the blooms late spring are really beautiful. They're kind of like a soft pink white. I have mine planted next to some Morden blush roses, which also have that soft pink bloom. And then right in front is pink profusion salvia. So a very striking pink, and that really striking pink with the red leaves right behind it is really beautiful. I really like that. They do bloom on old wood, so you need to be mindful about when you're pruning them. However, 9-barks do not want to be you can prune them if you want to. It's not that they don't want to be pruned. It's just that they have such a wonderful vase shape naturally that if you keep them pruned, they have a really hard time bouncing back from that, and they never quite look the same. So you do want to choose a variety that stays the size you need it to stay in the spot you're putting it. So I don't know if I mentioned prune after it's done blooming, just like your forsythia or your lilac. These are a zone 3 through 7. They do attract honeybees when they are blooming, which is wonderful, and they do want full sun. If you can give them full sun, minimum 6 to 8 hours, but if you can give them all day sun, they do even better. Number 6 is the Wabi Sabi viburnum. The reason I love this viburnum so much is that, one, it's thriving in our garden. So I always love to talk about the shrubs that are doing exceptionally well. And it's a dwarf version of the really popular double file viburnum, which I have as well. But that one gets a lot bigger. The thing I love about these two types, whether or not you've got space for the double file or space for Wabi Sabi, which grows 2 to 3 feet tall and 3 to 4 feet wide, is that their blooms are these really delicate kind of disc shapes, but the blooms, like the individual blooms in each disc, are quite large, and they're held up on these very like horizontal growing branches that look very architectural and layered. I love that look. It is a zone 5 through 8, and it's resistant to deer and rabbits. And when I say things are resistant, it's just that they're known to be resistant by people that deal with that. I mean, these things are thoroughly tested. I don't have deer and rabbits in my garden, so I'm kind of going off of what the tag says when it comes to that. But if that's something that you deal with, it's definitely worth a try, especially if a variety states that it's that. What I find interesting about viburnum blooms is that you can kind of categorize them into 2 categories. Same with hydrangeas. You've got your mop head type blooms, which kind of appear like big giant snowballs, like super striking. And then you've got your lace cap type blooms, which is what Wabi Sabi has. They're more flat, they look more starry, just really beautiful. And the structure of the lace caps are usually, you find that type of bloom in nature more often than you do a mop head. So they look really at home in kind of like a natural or woodland type garden setting. Now they do bloom on old wood, so again, you need to be mindful about when you're pruning them, but with the smaller versions, you don't normally have to worry about that. So if you do need to prune for size control or shape or whatever, you want to do that immediately after they're done blooming. You also want to put them in a position where they're going to get part to full sun. Mine definitely do not get full sun, and they're doing pretty good. For viburnums, we find here in high desert where they don't get any, cloud cover or protection often, when we put them in a spot that's more protected, we find that their foliage doesn't burn quite as easily. In more mild climates, definitely you can position them in more sun. So I would say anywhere between like 4 hours or more of sun, you'll get better production out of your viburnums. Number 7 is the Sesky Gold Dwarf Birch, zone 2 through 7. 2. That is so cold. I don't even know where a zone 2 is. Is that like Alaska? Like that is so cold, and this shrub can withstand it. They're very closely related to the birch trees, but they're a slow growing dwarf version. They grow about 2 to 4 feet tall, 1.5 to 3 feet wide. The thing I love about this plant, which I actually don't have any currently in my landscape, but I have 3 of them sitting in containers in our high tunnel ready to be planted. So I'm gonna get them in the ground probably in the next week or 2. But I've always admired this plant because when they push new growth, they look kind of like autumn hues. I mean, like yellows, reds, orange kind of, and then they mellow out to a chartreuse green. So even throughout the whole season, they have a very bright kind of glowing appearance. I'm gonna position mine in an area where they can grow to their full size because they have a very kind of delicate fan appearance when they're not pruned. And that kind of goes the same for all of these dwarf varieties. You kind of just like want to put them somewhere where you can just let them get to their full size. They stay so small anyway that it's nice to see their natural growth habit, unless you're wanting to hedge or something like that. But that's not something you're probably going to want to do with the birch tree, or birch shrub rather. We have birch trees in our garden right now, quite a few of them. And what I do find about birches here, and I don't know if it's going to be the same with this smaller shrub, is that they do like a very consistent source of water. We water again by drip irrigation, so we'll make sure that that's set up to the plants, but they will be in a location where they receive ample light. They do want part to full sun to be happy. They're also resistant to deer if that's something you deal with, but I just think they're such a beautiful, with their kind of fine, smaller leaves and that color, they just are a really beautiful texture to add into the garden. Number 8 is the Winecraft Black Smokebush, which I have 3 in our landscape. Now this shrub is probably the largest one of any of the ones I'm going to talk about today, but it grows 4 to 6 feet tall and wide. But the reason I wanted to add it in here is that oftentimes we want a smokebush in our garden, but all the other varieties just get huge. They get like a good sized tree, like a small tree. They're so big. So to have one that stays small like that is really wonderful. They do want a full sun location. They're zone 4 through 8. And then they bloom early in the summer on new wood. So you can prune them to kind of size control them even more if you want to. But the blooms that you see, that smoke, is actually not technically the blooms. Those are the seed pods that are left over after the blooms fade, which I find quite interesting. But they are wonderful to use in flower arranging or just to leave in the landscape as a really wonderful texture. When they break dormancy and push their new leaves in the spring, they're kind of a rich purple color. And then when the heat comes, they turn to a super dark, rich plum, almost black color, which is probably where they get the Winecraft Black name. I don't think I mentioned, maybe I did, but the flower, like the actual flower color, is a pink red and very vibrant before that smoke kind of typical bloom look of the smoke bush kind of takes over. They also have a wonderful fall color too. So the dark leaves kind of brighten up again into shades of purple, orange, and red. Really pretty fall show. Resistant to deer and rabbits as well. The last two on my list I saved on purpose to be the last ones I talk about because they're the ones I have no experience with yet. They're new varieties. I'm excited to grow them. But number 9 is called the Baby Kim, not the Baby Kim, just Baby Kim lilac. You might be familiar with Miss Kim lilac, which is a beautiful shrub, but it gets quite large. Like it can get, I don't know, 8 to 10 feet, I think, or maybe even taller, and then 8 feet wide. That's a big lilac. Baby Kim stays 2 to 3 feet tall, 3 feet wide. It has the same kind of blooms. They're very delicate. It's not like the big panicles of your traditional lilac. They're just more like delicate sprays of a very light lavender color, but they don't age out to white. They stay true to color as they start to fade, which is really nice. And just the fact that they stay so small and they actually prefer high pH soil, that makes it a winner in my book already when I haven't even tried it yet. So they do bloom mid through late spring. Typically they're picking up and blooming after our forsythias are done. So if you plan your beds right, which I'm kind of right in the middle of trying to plant several of our flower beds so that I can make sure to have interest all throughout the year. But we'll have our forsythias blooming first, and then maybe some of our earlier bloom bulbs that are blooming, and then the lilacs pick up and go for it afterwards. So it's a really fun show to see. They do bloom on old wood, so if you do need to prune it, not likely with this small of a shrub, but if you do so immediately after it's done blooming so it can have time to produce buds for next year's bloom. They do attract butterflies and are resistant to deer. And I do like the color of their leaves. So when they're done blooming, they're just this nice compact tidy shrub with glossy dark green leaves. It's really pleasing. Zone 3 through 8. Did I say that already? So very winter hardy. I mean, going down to zone 3, what is that? Negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit, right? I think so. That's crazy cold. I don't want to live there. And the last one on my list is the Polypetite Rose of Sharon. Most Rose of Sharons get enormous. You usually think of them as being a huge shrub or even a small tree. A lot of them are pruned into a tree shape, and they're wonderful plants. But the Polypetite stays 3 to 4 feet tall and wide. It's got kind of bluish green leaves, so a really unique color of leaf, and then lavender pink blooms for, you know, about midsummer through the rest of the season. It's also nearly seedless, so you don't have a bunch of seedlings popping up all over the place, which is really nice. They are a zone 5 through 9 and bloom on new wood. So if you do need to prune something like this, as with other Rose of Sharons, you would want to do that right when they start to break dormancy in the early spring or late spring. For Rose of Sharons, it's usually late spring, and they're one of the last ones to break dormancy, but it's a really great time to do your pruning at that point because you can see, you know, where you've got the strongest growth, and you can prune accordingly and prune out anything broken or dead at that time. Rose of Sharons are really great in our area. I mean, they seem to be very adaptable to our high pH soil. There's also, if height isn't a concern, but width is, there's the white pillar and the purple pillar. I've just recently planted a white pillar out on the new property, and they stay very narrow, still giving you the dramatic height, I think like 10 feet tall while staying just a few feet, 2 to 3 feet, I think, wide. So they give you like a very strong impact in the garden, but they are very useful for smaller and more narrow spaces, which is not technically what I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to talk about, you know, short and narrow shrubs just to tuck in, but those pillar Rose of Sharons are a really great option as well. And that's it, you guys, for today's video. I hope this was helpful, or maybe just fun to hear about some different varieties that maybe you don't have in your garden, some different options for those of you who need something either for containers or for just smaller areas in your garden. And I find even in larger spaces, like I've got some areas that are very large that we're trying to fill up, but sometimes even in those spaces you want an accent of a specific color of leaf or a bloom or whatever, but you don't want it to actually get as big as some of these shrubs counterparts that get so large. So it's just nice to have the versatility and know that that's available in some types of shrubs. So anyway, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.